The time has come for America to hear the truth.
We are going to stand with them, and not only are we going to fight for their rights, but we're going to stand up for our rights here in our state, in our homes, and in our community.
One day longer, one day stronger. One day longer, one day stronger.
Because the future of labor's rights in the United States of America is not going to be decided in the courts. It's not going to be decided in Congress. It's not going to be decided on talk radio, and it sure is not going to be decided on Fox News.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
Good morning, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-hosts and fellow agitators David Story and Adam Keller. It is Saturday, April 24th, 2021, and we're broadcasting live online and on the radio on WVNN in the Huntsville, Decatur, Athens listening area from Athens, Alabama. A recording of this program will play tomorrow, Sunday, April 25th, 2021, on the great WGOL in Russellville, Alabama, and sometime next week on WHIV in New Orleans, Louisiana. Today, we are coming to you commercial-free, courtesy of the Alabama AFL-CIO. So get the number ready if you want to call us. It's 866-494-9866. Again, the number is 866-494-9866. We are talking today to Brendan O'Connor, member of the Strike Wave Collective Editorial Board, about his new book, Blood Red Lines, How Nativism Fuels the Right. We'll be talking about the defeat of a charter school bill, the police review in Huntsville, and more on today's Valley Labor Report. So remember, folks, the North Alabama DSA has a necessities drive this Saturday from 3 to 5 p.m. at the IBEW Local 558 Union Hall on Clinton Avenue, right across from Yellowhammer and Campus 805. So bring by your non-perishable food items, your PPE, clothes, blankets, all that stuff, and your donations will be forwarded to the Manna House. If you want to see what we are up to throughout the week and get our snide quips about the news of the day, then you should follow us on social media. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/The Valley Labor Report. We're on Twitter at Labor Reporters. I'm on Twitter at JacobM_AL. David is on Twitter at Radical Unionist. That's spelled RADICL Unionist. If you missed part of the show and want to go back and watch it later, you can search YouTube for The Valley Labor Report and subscribe to our channel. You can go back and watch the full show there, and we clip segments that we release throughout the week, so you can just watch one topic or see, something that finds interesting. We've got our whole catalog of shows on our YouTube channel. We do upload the program on more than 11 different podcasting apps, so to see if we are on your listening platform of choice, you can go to the Valley Labor Report .transistor.fm/subscribe. We've got a website where you can buy our fantastic union-made hats, our union-made stickers, our union-made bumper stickers. It is thevalleylaborreport.org. We had 2 more hat orders this week, so that is great. Looking for more next week. If you appreciate our work and want to keep us on the air, then finally, you can consider throwing us a couple dollars a month on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. Our guest today is Brendan O'Connor. He is a member of the Strike Wave Editorial Collective, a journalist, a reporter, a union member, a labor organizer. Brendan, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We are glad to have you. So, let's start off so that we can get to know you a little more, so the audience can get to know you a little more. You're a union member. What union are you a member of, and what has been your relationship to the labor movement? How did you come into the labor movement? What have you kind of done over your career of labor activism that's maybe particularly interesting?
For sure, yeah. So it is my great honor to be a member of the National Writers Union. My first union was I was a member of the Writers Guild of America East. I live in New York. I had been a freelance journalist for a few years before getting hired as a staff writer at a website that no longer exists called Gawker. That was my first union job, and I quickly became very involved in helping to organize the shop outside of our contract struggle. Taking on lots of different shop floor fights. I eventually became co-chair of the unit, and probably our big struggle was after a few years of that, we were threatened with pretty massive budget cuts. And the company was threatening to lay off scores of our unit members. And after a pretty protracted struggle, we were able to get them to, change the layoffs into very healthy severance packages offered as buyouts that people could opt into. And that way, people who wanted to leave were able to leave under pretty favorable conditions. And then ultimately, nobody got laid off involuntarily, which was a pretty good win, because a lot of our members live in New York. Rent is very expensive here, so even a couple more months of rent money makes a huge difference in people's lives. After leaving that job, I became a member of the National Writers Union, which organizes a lot of freelance, part-time, precariously employed media workers. And so that's where I am now, organizing on that part of the industry.
Yeah, and that's super important. Organizing the freelancers and gig workers and stuff like that is just, that is so incredibly important. And one of the reasons why it's so important to pass the PRO Act, despite some Twitter ostensibly Twitter freelancers saying to the contrary. So
we could do a whole hour on that.
Let's not.
Yeah, one day, maybe next month we'll have you back, and maybe some other freelancers to talk about the PRO Act, because there's some misinformation about the PRO Act and how it's going to affect freelancers.
Well, and plus the important takeaway from listening to him was the fact that they went from basically being screwed to negotiating a fair, reasonable departure from that. And unfortunately, I've really not kept up with the writers industry and the unions up until the past year and a half when we started doing our show. And man, it has become like the automotive industry of the 90s, 80s, and 90s. That is a brutal industry to be in.
Well, the New Yorker is like, the New Yorker is like a legacy magazine. They're like, oh, you get to write for the New Yorker. That's pretty crazy. And they're starting staff writer salaries. They wanted to start their staff writer salaries at like $40,000 a year in New York City. That's insane. Like that's like an entry-level gig in Huntsville, Alabama. Yeah. Oh man, it's just crazy. So
we won't go. Yeah, we can go off on tangents all day long.
Brendan. So,
needless to say, you're in a precarious industry, but
yes.
The book was unbelievable. I've only made. I told Jacob yesterday. I've only made it through. I think midway through chapter 6. I'm a terrible. Compared to other people, I generally read a chapter and I make it about halfway into the second chapter, and then I go back and read the first chapter again because I'm like, I missed something.
Yeah.
So, and maybe but I'll reread a chapter at least twice, most of the time 3 times. So I'm about halfway through your book, and it's amazing, and it's I would say it's amazing. It's exactly what I expected, but you cover it in so much more detail than anyone that I have seen cover what's happened. The past 20 to 30 years. But
I appreciate you saying so.
Yeah, it is. And anybody that wants to learn about the border crossings, the what we would call undocumented workers in America, and how the system has been rigged and to screw them specifically. I'd seen you on Majority Report, and in all fairness, I watched the show on the Majority Report, and generally speaking, I hate any discussion about this because I'm an old school unionist. I grew up in a union family. It's very much protectionism, very, typically the type of people that you were speaking about, except for it wasn't about racism. It was more about we're protecting our jobs, we're protecting, our family's legacy and things like that.
Well, real quick, talk about how you went down to Mexico to train people on machines that were taken from union
out of
factories
I had to go install the equipment that we uprooted in America and took them to Monterrey, Mexico, and Saltillo, Mexico, and Torreon, Mexico, and install and train the workers down there. So me particular, and that's kind of why, that's what I told Jacob. It's kind of why I wanted to bring you on, because I see how this has been used politically and economically. Both politically, the politicians play both sides to the undocumented workers' detriment, and economically they're played both ways. But I wanted to bring you on mainly because I want to talk through what's going on and try to get people like me more, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but more aware of, and maybe more acceptable of what's happening, as opposed to just saying to hell with these people, because that's basically been my mantra for life, and I don't think it's fair to us. I don't think it's fair to them. So, and that's what a terrible intro to ask you to speak about your book, but that's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, this guy's the most researched that I've read. He's by far the most intelligent person that I've heard speaking. So and not to divert from your book, but also I think it's important to combine the two and say, this is what's going on with this ultra right wing Proud Boys, the idiots of America. But there's also a gigantic subsection of America that are truly dedicated unionists that feel the same way, just not for the same reasons.
Lay out the thesis of your book, and then speak to what David was saying, because that's such an there, like David said, there are people that are that they're not in good faith, and they're legitimately nativist and just really real just terrible thoughts about brown people. But then there are people, like David said, that have legitimate economic concerns about this kind of stuff. So what is Blood Red Lines? How Nativism Fuels the Right? And how would you talk to somebody like David about this?
Yeah. All right. Okay. So
That's
there's a lot to tackle here. But no, I appreciate you kind of laying out where you're coming from, and I do hope that the book is able to reach an audience like yourself. Okay. So stepping back, what is this book about? My book, Blood Red Lines: How Nativism Fuels the Right, is an attempt to understand the array of forces that mobilize and benefit from anti-immigrant politics. And I think that this is a particularly important thing to try to grapple with right now, because early in the 20th century, W.E. Du Bois said that the color line is going to be the problem of the 20th century. And I would argue that in the 21st century, borders and immigration are kind of going to be a similarly paradigmatic political problem, that everyone is going, no matter what ideological background you're coming from, everyone has to kind of reckon with the fact that around the world, hundreds of millions of people are already being displaced and are going to be displaced by the economic, environmental, and political upheavals that we're already living through. This is already happening.
Yeah.
And this is going to change the way that politics works in the United States and in elsewhere and elsewhere. And the reason that I'm focusing on excuse me, the way that the Republican Party and the far right think about these questions and approach these questions is because I think, you know, I kind of, I'll be clear, like I do not share these ideas, but I think it's important to understand the logic underlying this kind of nativist ideology, because as you said, you know, I'm a unionist. I believe in the power of an organized working class to bring about a more just and equal society, and that will require kind of being able to reach across racial, ethnic, and national divisions, and you know the bosses and the ruling class work very hard to make sure that doesn't happen. And so to your question about, like, all right, so how do we think about folks who have a kind of intuitive sympathy to the idea that it is worth protecting, you know, is protecting good union jobs in the United States, is worth protecting the gains and the victories that the labor movement and the working class have won here. That's absolutely true. I'm 100% with you on that, and I understand why intuitively it might make sense that, well, if that's where you're coming from, you might say, well, then why shouldn't we have stricter controls on immigration? Why shouldn't we be very careful about how many expanding the size of the workforce? Because doesn't that push wages down? Like, if there are more people than there are jobs, that's not good for workers. And intuitively, that does make sense. But what we've seen, there's a couple of ways that I would respond to that. And one of those is that there's been a lot of research by sociologists and economists on this very question. And outside of a kind of select ideologically driven few, the scholarship just shows that simply just doesn't happen. And part of why that doesn't happen is because because of the way that capitalism works, when there are more workers in the aggregate, that also means there are more consumers. Right. And so people who are working more have more money to spend. Also, because undocumented workers, they end up paying into the system, but they can't access social services. So that there's actually a net, like, this isn't a good thing, gain. But there is a net benefit to that part of the labor force for those kinds of costs.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I think that's one of the reasons that it hasn't been solved. The issue hasn't been solved, and I think it's a manufactured issue. But the issue hasn't been resolved yet, because I truly believe both sides of the government knows that there's a tremendous benefit of these workers paying into the system for a lifetime and not benefiting it at all. But stepping back, I think we should also, in the context of the conversation, make everyone completely aware, because we are on a conservative talk radio show, even though we are, or a radio station, I'll say, even though we're more of left-leaning unionist mentality, that the workers that are coming here are not doing so because America is the greatest country in the world. The workers are coming here because the neoliberal policies that's been put in place mainly during Bill Clinton's era, along with a Republican a mostly Republican Congress, but a Democratic president, and has
And
allowed
George Bush
capital,
and Obama, and
has allowed capital to take over essentially the resources that were granted to them in their constitution. So I think it's important to point out that these people aren't coming because of what you hear on this radio station, on every other talk show, because it's the greatest country in the world. They're being forced here because they're displaced from their home country.
Yeah, it's much less of a pull to the U.S. and a push from their home countries. And here's an interesting fact. There's a country in Africa that has the like literally the majority of the world's diamond or gold mines, the majority of the world's gold mines, but they don't have any gold reserves. Why is that? Because France owns all the gold mines there, and France has like literally the world's most in gold reserves, and it's literally France is sucking currently today gold, natural resources from the people of this country. And so that's like one of the most explicit examples of colonialism that we can see today. Is still operating, much less, you've got the historical legacy of that. And then the United States has done things like that in Central and South America, overthrowing democratically elected governments that want to take control of their natural resources from Western imperialist forces and use them for the good of their citizens, as opposed to allowing their citizens to be subjected to the imperialist forces of the United States and other places. And so when the United States goes in there, overthrows these governments, creates a coup, there's all sorts of there are power vacuums. We fund death squads. I mean, it's like the situation that both parties have created in these countries. I mean, David mentioned Bill Clinton. We can go back to Reagan. We can go back to Carter, Obama, Bush. I mean, it's all of them have just destroyed Central and South America. And Brendan, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add to the push factor there that these people are feeling.
Well, I would say the other all of that is absolutely true, and I think that what we are going to see as the 21st century progresses is that that climate change will also be a push factor. Yeah. With the combination of droughts and flooding and hugely destructive storms, it is going to be. It's already difficult to have a kind of stable, comfortable life in many parts of the global South, and this, and the climate crisis is only going to add to that chaos, and so that is another push factor. Yeah,
and one of the things that you really brought out in your book, and maybe you could speak to, we got about 5 minutes left in this segment, was and is what we come to expect out of all of these manufactured catastrophes. I guess it's probably not the best word, but it's the one that comes to mind, is the fact that there's a lot of people profiting, and I guess probably you didn't go into it real in depth on the Majority Report, but when I purchased your book and started reading, it shouldn't have come as a surprise, because there's always a profit from capitalism whenever there's some kind of issue, I will say, instead of a catastrophe. But the amount of people profiting off of this, and the trade, what's the word? The trade expos. I mean, it's the same thing we see with the military expos, and just tons of money. The outpouring of money that's gone in to keep this supposed border control in place. Could you kind of talk about that? Because I think a lot of people have, you in Alabama especially, we hear build a wall, build a wall, build a wall, but people have no clue the amount of money that the government resources is being spent on all this hokey horse crap to supposedly protect a border.
Yeah, so I mean, there's the kind of initial layer of profit that industries that employ migrant labor, and particularly undocumented labor, benefit from. And that's benefit that is accrued over decades of degrading the strength of unions and degrading the strength of organized labor, and making it so that, you know, they can charge, or that they can pay starvation wages in construction and agriculture and in various service industries. So that's one layer of profit. But then there's another layer of profit to be gained from the regulation and control and enforcement of these immigration policies. And part of the reason why I think that the Trump administration's efforts to build a big, spectacular, beautiful wall is that there's actually not that much money to be made in a big concrete wall. There's a lot more money to be made in selling drones and artificial intelligence surveillance programs and all of the mobile units, all the military hardware. There's just more money to be made in that. And that is in part, I think, why many establishment Democrats are so amenable to this compromise solution, is because they know that this just keeps this industry going. And this is an industry that is flourishing all over the world because the politics of border enforcement, as these push factors continue to grow that we were just talking about, the politics of border enforcement are only becoming more and more salient. And so there's more and more money to be made. This is an industry that is worth hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah. And when we talk about money being made, of course, we're talking about our taxpayer dollars being spent. Right. You know, it's not coming out of the benevolence of the companies. You know, when I as a person look at what threat, if any, an undocumented worker is to me, and then I look at what the threat of a continuous funding this insanity, just like the insane wars that's been going on for the last 20 years, the cost is enormous, and there's no benefit to either side to fix this issue, because there's lobbyists up there that are getting paid just like Boeing, just like Lockheed have been for the last 20 years in Afghanistan, Iraq, and everywhere else around the world. But this is but like you say, this is another thing that's not going away, that we need to be talking about, and we need to address, you know, the sooner the better.
Yep. Folks, you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. We're talking to Brendan O'Connor, author of Blood Red Lines. We will be right back. Talk to him some more after this break. Stay tuned. If you're listening online, be sure to like and subscribe.
Huntsville's #1 news, talk, and weather station. WVNN Athens. WVNN FM Trinity. A Cumulus station. It's 10 o'clock.
From ABC News, I'm Brian Clark. The use of Johnson & Johnson's coronavirus vaccine can resume. The CDC and FDA lifted the 11-day pause while studying reports of blood clots. Dr. Henry Bernstein was part of the CDC's advisory panel.
This event of blood clots and low platelets is extraordinarily rare, and the benefits of the vaccine are huge.
15 women out of about 8 million people who got the vaccine got blood clots. 3 died. Information sheets will now be distributed to providers about those blood clots. CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky said,
"The American public should feel reassured about the safety systems and protocols that we have in place around the COVID-19 vaccines."
More protests are planned for today in Columbus, Ohio, after the fatal police shooting of a black teenager. ABC's Trevor Alt is there.
Protesters taking to the streets each night since Bryant's death. The city's public safety director now asking for patience and empathy, saying the black community is emotionally exhausted. And in their grief, Micaiah Bryant's family is adamant this final incident does not define her.
She was a very loving girl. She loved her family, and her family loved her so much.
She was a black teenager seen on police body camera video wielding a knife at another girl. President Biden's infrastructure plans may have suffered a setback Friday when Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, a key vote, said the bill should focus on conventional projects like roads, bridges, and rails and should be passed in a bipartisan manner.
I think this is truly a bipartisan effort. We're working in a bipartisan way to put a good infrastructure bill. We can take care of the needs of our country, and we can do it in a responsible way.
President spoke by phone with the president of Turkey amid reports he plans to classify the massacre of 1.5 million Armenians a century ago as a genocide. You're listening to ABC News.
How clean is your nose? Most airborne germs and allergens invade through the nose, your body's air filter. It's first line of defense. You wash your hands and brush your teeth, but what about your nose? Did you know there's an easy way to keep your nose clean and help your body protect itself? It's called Navage Nasal Care. Navage uses powered suction to clean your nose by flushing out pollen, mucus, bacteria, and viruses. Millions use Navage for fast, all-natural relief from sinus congestion and allergies, and to breathe better, sleep deeper, snore less, and feel healthier without drugs. Navage is easy to use, affordable, and it comes with an absolute guarantee of satisfaction. And 50,000 independent online reviews averaging 4.7 stars show just how much people love their Navage. You wash your hands and brush your teeth every day. Now you can clean your nose and help protect your health with Navage. At Navage.com, CVS, Walgreens, Bed Bath & Beyond, Target, and Rite Aid. Navage. N-A-V-A-G-E. Make good nasal hygiene your new normal with Navage. Clean nose, healthy.
Hey y'all, are you tired of hearing that the South is just a bunch of racist rednecks? Well, tune in to Dixieland of the Proletariat podcast. We talk about Southern working class history and current events through a leftist perspective. Join Nelson, Senior Telecommunications Director Tommy, Comrade Kate, former pig farmer Tyler, and Brother William, wherever you stream your podcast. And good Lord willing and the creek don't rise, we'll see y'all next time. It's Dixieland of the Proletariat, y'all.
News Talk 770 AM, 92.5 FM, WVNN.
Put it there, boy. We'll show these fascists what a couple of hillbillies can do.
All right, we're third time's the charm. Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-hosts David Story and Adam Keller. We are talking to Brendan O'Connor, author of Blood Red Lines, How Nativism Fuels the Right, and he's been laying out some really good stuff about just how much money it is being made by the so-called crisis at the border, both in terms of exploitation of undocumented workers and in terms of contractors like Lockheed Martin and things like that.
Well, they're not. I brought them
like
up.
them. Yeah, exactly. Contractors like them, making drones and things like that. And so that's why maybe, calls by Democrats to make a smart wall may not be so, or they are not as altruistic and humanistic as maybe they would want you to think, both in terms of their effect and in terms of the reasoning behind it. But let talk about the really quick, if you could talk about the way that it benefits industries that exploit undocumented workers to have this nativist and xenophobic backlash against undocumented workers, because we know that there are entire industries in this country that would completely fall apart if Trump had actually followed through on his promise to deport 13 million undocumented workers. The whole economy would be wrecked, but specifically there are certain industries that would just have gone bankrupt. People would have lost billions of dollars, and so these are industries that need these undocumented workers, but they also fund nativist and xenophobic movements, and so there's an ostensible contradiction there. Can you help us work through how it's not a contradiction?
Yeah, I think that it is a contradiction, but it is a contradiction that is resolved in ways that benefit the bosses and the capitalists, which is to say that if you are let's say you are an employer in big agriculture. You have for many years benefited from the fact that many of your workers are undocumented, which means that they are less able to avail themselves of the already very, very few protections that are offered to workers in this country, and especially farm workers in this country. But you still need those workers. You need those workers around. Your whole business model runs on the fact that you don't have to pay them very much, or you can pay them for piecework. And those wages will fluctuate over time. But you also benefit from the fact that there's a political climate in which those workers and their families are denigrated and demonized and treated as less than human. And not just in terms of like rhetoric and discourse, but there's a whole political apparatus that is designed to specifically repress migrant workers. And this creates a climate of paralysis and fear. And I can't tell you how many stories I have heard over the course of my years of reporting about bosses and managers threatening to call ICE when workers march on the boss, or start talking about unionizing or organizing when they hear about workers, going to, maybe there's a local worker center that they hear that workers have been talking to. This is a way of managing and controlling the workforce. Yeah. And this, so there is a contradiction, but it is one that is ultimately productive and profitable. But it's also unstable. And I think that that's what we're seeing over the past couple of years, is that the way that these contradictions get resolved is becoming less predictable, basically.
Yeah, and we've seen the same. We've talked about and I think it was a poultry plant in Mississippi where they won a tremendous amount of back wages. I mean, like in the millions.
No. It was what it was. And I bring it up. I bring this specific thing up constantly because it's so gross. But what happened was in August of 2019, there was a raid on a Mississippi poultry plant that they arrested 600 people while they were on the job, and it was immediately after they won a $2.5 million sexual harassment lawsuit. Lawsuit.
And it was a tremendous amount of money.
A tremendous amount of money for sexual harassment that the union won immediately after they won that lawsuit.
The workers are deported.
Yeah, the workers are deported. And it's like, that's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence at all. And if you don't think that hurts, it's not only undocumented workers in that facility. There are also U.S.-born workers in that facility. And if you think that is beneficial to them and their working environment and their ability to advocate for themselves for higher wages and better working conditions, you're a fool. I mean, it doesn't just affect undocumented workers. It affects us as well. And that's, and I think that's a good way to, Brendan, how would you, when you're talking to folks that may say things that folks would think are let's say problematic or, things like that, but it doesn't come from a place of actual hatred. It comes from a place that they've been propagandized to believe that these people are the reasons that their wages are low or their wages are not increasing. And there's been union rhetoric aimed at these people, calling these people scabs, and in some places they've actually functioned as scabs, right? How do you talk to folks and get them to see that standing with undocumented workers for their rights is why should they do that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a really critical and difficult question, and I think a lot of credit does have to be given to the labor movement in the United States, kind of broadly, of its evolution and its change over the past
5 to 10 years.
A little more, over the past. I mean, even longer. I think I think it was in 2000 that the AFL-CIO convention committed itself to, protecting the right of migrant workers, partially because they realized that, actually, we should be organizing.
Right.
We should be organizing these people and not condemning them as scabs. Partly because they realized that, as it turns out, migrant workers, particularly from Central and South America, are more likely to have favorable views of unions and of labor movements and to join, given the opportunity, than many U.S.-born workers, which is something to take advantage of. But to speak to a U.S.-born worker, kind of any race, this is not something that is. These sentiments are not something that are limited to white workers.
Yeah, well, these sentiments can be held by even Hispanic workers. I mean, Cesar Chavez, right? I mean,
Cesar Chavez.
Yeah, I mean, he was terrible to undocumented workers, and he's like the founder of the United Farm Workers Union, right? And there's a history of internationalism and like support for workers of all of any race, documentation status, or whatever. But there's also a long history of not even racialized, but like if you're not documented, you're not welcome, right? And so I mean, absolutely, it's not just limited to white workers, the phenomenon that we're talking about.
Well, it's more isolated now than white. I mean, during Cesar Chavez's time, it was more of an acceptable idea. Now it's not so acceptable, except for in specific regions of the United States. And it's these conversations, and it's your book that need to continue happening, especially in the Southeast United States and possibly the Southwest as well, but all over. Because this isn't going away, and I think that's something that you've pointed out several times. This isn't going away. We've got to have these conversations, and we've got to figure out, one, how to bring people on board to make them comfortable with what's happening, but two, to honestly hold the politicians that we've elected accountable, because they're obviously not fixing this problem either.
Yeah. And, it's like, you were talking before about having to go down to Mexico and train workers there on how to use equipment that was picked up and moved from factories in the
General
States.
Motors and Ford, yeah.
Yeah, it's not as though those workers
no, they didn't have a choice.
Factories.
Yeah.
Workers wherever they are from, everybody just wants a comfortable life, to take care of their family, to not have to worry about where their next meal is coming from. Like, those are the kinds of things that people can see connections with, and when we are pitted against each other, it does make it harder to see those similarities. But if someone takes the time to have a conversation and try to walk through, try to walk someone through the fact that it is not the migrant worker who has broken the labor movement. It is the fact that the bosses broke the labor movement in order to pay migrant workers less, in order to pay whoever less. And it just so happens that that because of U.S. colonialism and imperialism, that the jobs here are relatively better paying than in other parts of the hemisphere. This is not something that normal working people are responsible for. People are just trying to get by.
Yeah.
But then, when when those people come together and fight for their interests collectively, that's when a change can start to happen.
Yeah, and like you said, it's important to point out that the and that's kind of when I went down there, I guess early 2000s, 2000, 2001, 2002. I spent about 3 years down there, and you build relationships with people. You begin to love people that you're around, working around constantly. People take you into their home and break bread with you, and you know, and that was a pushing point for me to recognize, because prior to that, I was 150% protectionist, and that kind of opens up the door and makes you realize that these workers didn't create the situation that they're in. It is in essence, it is the same companies that I was working for that have found someone that's easier to exploit than we were. And so they have decided to move there, and I feel like that is where we can begin getting over this hump, is but bring people into the thought that we are all going to have to stand together at some point. It is either going to be now or it's going to be in 10 years from now, but at some point we're going to have to stand together as one. And begin pushing back on these multinational corporations now that just pick up and move from exploitable country to exploitable country. I mean, Mexico industry has during the 2000s was humongous. Not so much now.
Right.
And that's a big long dialogue. But that is, I guess what I'm trying to say is that was the goal to bring you on, because and I hate to play this up, but I mean, the book was very intelligently written, and you begin to see these different players all that are benefiting from this, and the far right and a lot of even the moderate right have gotten all of these followers or their supporters' eyes kind of glazed over with these ultra right talking points. And it's just, I don't know, we hear it every day being where we're at, but it's frustrating, because it's like, when you read your book, you can see the exploitation at all levels, but getting people to, and hopefully this radio show opens that up, getting people to read more, to discuss these topics more.
Yeah, well, so Brendan, so let's say we've got a listener out there who started out, like, look, I don't have any racial animus, but I'm like skeptical of what you're saying, and now we've brought them along, and they're saying, okay, it's not these folks' fault, they're not scabs, they're exploited just like me and David, and so what is the next step? Like, we've done the explanation, we've set the stage, like, what is to be done now? How, like, you talked about, like, okay, we need to stand together and we need to fight together as opposed to fighting each other. How does that happen? What are the things what policies should be advocated for? What should workers on the ground be doing to educate and to fight this war on working people that are documented and undocumented?
So I think there's a couple of different answers to that question. One would be, this is a labor radio show, so I'm just going to say they should organize a union, start fight against their boss together. But it's not just about organizing the workplace; it's about organizing everywhere. It's about organizing where you live, wherever you are in community, and there is oppression and exploitation, that is an opportunity to begin to fight back and to start fighting for a different world. I think the other thing to say is that, we were talking about, just how easy it is for GM or Ford to pick up and leave the United States, or to pick up and leave Mexico, to move wherever they need to in order to get the best returns on their investment for whatever they need, and to exploit people all over the world. It's not so easy for workers to move around. This is one of the great lies of the far right media ecosystem. It is extremely dangerous to come to the United States. It is extremely difficult. We do not have open borders. What we have is a way of funneling people into a deadly desert where thousands of people have died attempting to make a crossing. Now, if we were to kind of think about what it would mean to invert that and to say, actually, everyone in the world has a right to freedom of movement, but not capital. Capital has to stay put. The bosses have to stay put and can't just decide like, all right, we're done here. We're going to move this factory elsewhere. This is something to think about fighting for. This is something to imagine that not just the freedom of movement, but the freedom to stay. Most people, again, contrary to the mythology that the United States is the greatest country in the world, most people would prefer to stay where they are from. It is only under extreme duress that as traumatic and difficult and stressful a decision is made to pick up roots and to leave where you're home. Like, this is not something that the majority of people in this world want to do, but it is a choice that they are forced to make. And so to fight for a world where that is something that people aren't compelled to do is something else to fight for.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And so I've got one more kind of topic that I'd like to talk about, and then we can let you go. Unless, David, did you have something else you wanted to ask him?
No. I was just to bring about the point we talked with Max last week.
2 weeks ago, maybe?
2 weeks ago. But we talked about, I brought up the Zapatistas, and that's something that, you can look at and because what Brendan is saying here is they're forced to move. In the case of the Zapatistas, they actually came together, brought up arms against the government and said, this is our land and you're not going to take it any longer. That is the only other option that these people have, is to create their own autonomous society within. And they've done an amazing job, even though it's kind of waned a little bit. But it speaks to the fact that there is no no alternatives for these folks.
Yeah, so to wrap us up, Brendan, and again, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed this. And folks listening on WHIV, we're about to go. And then on the other side of this break, we're going to be talking about some Huntsville and Alabama topics. If you want to find that, you can go to YouTube, find us on the Valley Labor Report, stuff like that. But so Brendan, to wrap us up on our conversation about your book, Blood Red Lines: How Nativism Fuels the Right. We are on, right now, a conservative talk radio station. Your book says that nativism fuels the right. How would you encourage our conservative listeners to investigate their motivations in light of your thesis, to investigate how would you encourage them to investigate who nativism benefits and why they should or shouldn't cling to their conservatism and their nativism?
Yeah, well,
we're throwing a lot of curveballs.
Yeah, and just in 4.5 minutes, I want you to do that. I want you to change everybody's mind listening to this in 4 minutes. Go, no pressure.
So I think the operative question is, as it always is who benefits?
Yeah.
And we've been talking about this. And I think that, in my encounters with, I've talked to a lot of people who are conservatives, of people who are on the far right. this is not a question that is unfamiliar to them, is to ask who benefits from this. It's just that they have been told an answer that is wrong.
Right. I agree. That's real.
And so, like, to begin to approach this question anew from the perspective that, I wouldn't necessarily lead with, like, this is how socialists think about this, but to think about, like, all right, in this given situation, who is exploiting you, who is coming out ahead in this situation, and then to kind of build off of that and say, like, all right, well, if it's actually the boss and not your neighbor who is coming out ahead here, let's see where this goes. And I think that many people would come to see the light, as it were, if someone took the time to have that conversation with them.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the importance of having conversations with people that are that don't have the same views. And I think that's something that labor organizers, folks like me and you and David, like, we recognize kind of intrinsically that you can't limit your conversations and your organizing to just people that are socialists, right? You're not going to win much in America if all you have on your side is socialists. And so I think that's a good point, I think, Brendan.
And the other thing too is that, like, you don't necessarily have to start from the principle of, like, all right, I'm going to, in one conversation, going to turn this person into someone who fights for the liberation of the international working class.
Yes.
Like, you can just start with, all right, so this guy that you work with at the poultry processing plant is undocumented. Like, let's think about how your interests are aligned, and then start the struggle there, and then kind of build the struggle from there, rather than trying to take on the whole ideology all at once.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's so important, and not to feel discouraged if you don't change somebody's entire worldview in a 30-minute conversation, right? Because you're never going to do that. But if you can get them thinking about the way that society works and who's pulling the strings and who's benefiting from what, who their real enemy is, if you can just get them thinking, and they go home and they're like, I wonder about that. That's a win.
Well, yeah, one of the things that really and I'm baffled, because my age group, and we've talked about it numerous times, are so anti-authoritarian. The Gen Xers, my age group, just absolutely hated government and everything to do with it. And now they're the most bootlickinest. It's like, and you buy into all of this horse crap. And I believe if we could just get back to some of that anti-authoritarianism, that maybe they could see that they're being lied to from both sides. Both sides.
What happened to you guys?
I don't know. I'm still here, but I'm one of the last ones, it seems like. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Brendan, thank you so much. You can find Brendan's book on Haymarket. Haymarket.com or .org. Is it .com or .org? I don't know. Google Haymarket. Find Blood Red Lines, How Nativism Fuels the Right. Folks on WHIV, if you want to see the rest of the show, find us on YouTube. Folks that are listening on air or on YouTube, stick around. We will be right back.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison. This is News Talk 770 AM, 92.5 FM, WVNN. News starts now.
The CDC and FDA saying Johnson & Johnson vaccinations can resume immediately after being halted for more than a week. The single-shot vaccine now coming with a warning. Dr. Henry Bernstein of Cohen Children's Medical Center in New York was on the CDC advisory panel, which voted to...
We will continue to monitor the safety of the vaccine as more and more doses are administered.
There are now 15 known reports of blood clots possibly linked to the vaccine out nearly 8 million shots given. More protests expected today in Columbus, Ohio, following the fatal police shooting this week of a black teen who was swinging a knife at another girl. 16-year-old Micaiah Bryant shot multiple times. North Carolina's governor urging swift release of police body cam footage following the fatal shooting of Andrew Brown Jr., the black man killed at his home earlier this week. New crew members welcomed to the International Space Station this morning. They arrived aboard a SpaceX Dragon capsule. Dave Packer, ABC News.
WVNN. Depend on it.
Let's go! Hey!
All right, folks, welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-hosts David Story and Adam Keller. We just got through talking to Brendan O'Connor, a member of the editorial collective at Strike Wave. You can find more of their work there, and his book, Blood Red Lines, How Nativism Fuels the Right, How Nativism Fuels the Right. You can find that on Haymarket. Haymarket is a bookstore. You can find them online, haymarket.com or haymarket.org. I'm not exactly sure, but definitely want to get it from there instead of Amazon, because Haymarket is a good bookstore. So you should go there. You should find their stuff and find Blood Red Lines by Brendan O'Connor and read it, because it's good. So check out Strikewave as well. And go check out Strikewave. Strikewave is great. Yeah, we've talked to the AFGE and Machinist Union copycat duo, Douglas Williams and Brian
Conley.
Brian Conley. Yeah.
Conley.
Yeah, they
what an awesome last name.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they got to they saw us, me and David, being Machinist Union and AFGE duo, and they were like, "Oh, hey, we're gonna do that." We started it. Don't let them lie to you.
But Strikewave is a great organization if you want to keep up with the labor movement.
Yes,
and it's important to support these outlets. Strikewave is completely run by, labor activists, and there is no corporation behind them. They're a collective, and they do great work. Put out a lot of good stuff.
Yep. So Adam Keller is, he is our new co-host, and he and David watched the last the last city council meeting that had the police review by the HPCAC, and so I wasn't able to watch that. Adam actually read most of the report, I think, or quite a lot of the report, and so they're gonna. So Adam, I'm gonna throw it to you.
Yeah,
what happened? What happened at the city council meeting? What did the report say? All that kind of stuff. Just kind of break it down for us.
Sure, and let's catch people up that this report was commissioned after the June 1st and June 3rd Black Lives Matter protests in downtown Huntsville. If you remember, that's when peaceful protesters were met with tear gas and rubber bullets and pepper spray and unnecessary arrest.
Beanbags.
It was a police riot.
Yeah.
By any rational definition.
Yeah.
So. In response to activist backlash, the council commissioned this independent report through the advisory committee. They had a couple of independent attorneys to assist them. And unfortunately, the mayor and the city of Huntsville leadership took the approach that we can't have any conversations about policing or criminal justice, much less what happened on those two nights, until the report's finished.
A year later.
Yeah, so almost a year later, we've been waiting for this report so that, city council members and others could take their muzzle off and actually talk to the community publicly about how to make change in Huntsville. So the report came out. It's over 250 pages, I believe. Haven't read every word yet, but I've dived in quite a bit. I know many of our fellow activists have been doing the same. I want to, give some credit that the report does not paint Huntsville in a very favorable light. And there were multiple agencies involved on those two nights, in particular June 3rd, where it got really, really ugly. You'd had Madison Police Department, you had Madison County Sheriffs, and you had ALEA, state troopers who came in. And in fact, if you remember, there was a lot of talk about outside agitators. I mean, the only outside agitators were the state troopers coming up here, ready to bust heads. So, I do give credit that the report did find quite a bit of facts. They reviewed a lot of body cam footage. They did solicit opinions from the community. They interviewed people who were there. Interestingly enough, not a single Huntsville police officer was interviewed because more or less the city of Huntsville made sure that didn't happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounded like from what I took away from it, it sounded like the city attorney had advised the police department that they could speak if they chose to in their own accord, but that they would be giving up their rights that are protected by the Constitution. And basically, he was saying, if y'all talk to them and you get a lawsuit, you're on your own. Is what it kind of sounded like to me,
Yeah.
And rightfully so, because the report, I think they said, was 85 pages. The report was very intensive. The report was very damning for the police department because they had body cam. Regardless of talking to the police, they had this body cam footage of the police saying some pretty damning things on their body cams, and
as well as evidence of when some cops caught themselves realizing they had body cams and cut them off. Or conveniently covered up their body cams and badge numbers. So, I think there was no cooperation from the sheriff, from Madison City, or from the state troopers. So we're still waiting to hear. I mean, if we're ever going to get anything from Sheriff Kevin Turner, I would love to hear what he has to say about this because, as a classic technique, everyone likes to pass the buck. Yeah. Right? So City of Huntsville wants to say, well, really, we weren't the worst guys. The worst guys were these other agencies.
That they brought in.
That they brought in.
Specifically brought in.
So I know there's been some legitimate criticism of the report and the committee's maybe lack of teeth, for lack of a better phrase. I think there's truth to that. But even what did come through is still pretty damning, as you said. And, I pulled out some quotes. I just want to read this. This was the night of June 1st in Huntsville, downtown Huntsville, the smart city, allegedly, the progressive star of Alabama. Quote, one officer was heard saying he hopes the protest is shown on the news and people realize they cannot play around in Huntsville because they don't play nice in Huntsville.
And he was specifically talking about the police don't play nice.
Yes, this was a police officer speaking to another police officer.
Mm-hmm. And remember, there was not a single instance of even so much as property damage, much less violence by the protesters in Huntsville. The only property damage happened because of a stray police rubber bullet or something, that then the protesters raised money for and donated to the business. The police didn't raise money for it. The community did. The community that was out there protesting. The police damaged the property. I mean, like by the definition of this new riot bill that's being pushed through, quote unquote riot bill, it's a BS anti-protest, anti-First Amendment bill. If you want to find out more about that, you can listen to our interview with Alabama Arise's Dev Wakely on our YouTube channel. But under that definition, the police were literally rioting in Huntsville. I mean, that's what happened last year.
Except for the fact that
they're not going to get arrested.
Have immunity.
Yeah.
That's the problem, is they have immunity for everything that they do.
Yeah.
Right, and that's something that, as far as I know, was confirmed in this report and in the conversation at the city council, that not a single person has faced any discipline for their actions on that night. Or on those two nights, which included pepper spraying people who were running away. It included shooting people with rubber bullets.
Ripping apart the calf of one person.
That was my friend. That was my friend. I know him. He couldn't walk literally for months. Like there was it's the fellow that used to come with us. He's now in Michigan, but he I had asked him to come on picket line with us, and he still couldn't walk straight. Months later.
Yeah, it was it really speaks to this mentality that they have of being above the law. They are truly they are unaccountable to anyone. And I think one of the things that and maybe you can speak some more to this because I don't live in Huntsville. I just watched it because it was interesting. But one of my biggest takeaways was the fact that there's no accountability to the Huntsville Police Department from the people, because we can call in Madison County or we can call in the state troopers, and guess what? They don't have to follow the same rules that we have to follow, and they don't have to answer to whoever is running the city, and they don't have to answer to the citizens that they've perpetrated these atrocities against.
Right, and something that you said, Adam, is that they're not these places, these agencies aren't cooperating, or some of them are not cooperating with the investigation. And what would a cop say to you if they were just asking questions and they pulled you over? Oh, what, are you hiding something?
Not only are they not cooperating, the problem is Huntsville had the police chief has specifically said no rubber bullets. Well, guess what?
Right.
They were used.
Madison brings in rubber bullets, starts shooting people. Madison, it was confirmed that it was Madison County Sheriff's, and there's no accountability, even though supposedly the city of Huntsville is supposed to be, the response to this.
I think the police chief McMurray wanted it both ways. I think Mayor Tommy Battle wanted it both ways. McMurray wanted to say it was his operation, but only the good parts, of course. McMurray said that he did not agree with the use of armed snipers on the roof of the courthouse, looking through their rifle scopes at innocent civilians on our streets.
Yeah, I mean, what is one of the first things, and I thought about that when they said that, because I'm a very active firearm owner. One of the first things whenever I'm training somebody on firearm usage is never point a weapon at something you're not ready to kill. It is just as plain and simple as that. And the fact that there were people with their rifles pointed into the crowd really speaks to the lack of the
lack of concern for
not
human
concern,
life.
not concern, but the fact that they shouldn't even be a firearm owner.
Yes,
the police should
you
not
and I
even
know
be
this
a firearm
as
owner.
a couple country guys raised growing up with shotguns and rifles.
Right.
We know this.
Yeah.
This is their job.
Yeah.
And why the hell does Madison, the city of Madison, have snipers? This isn't Fallujah.
Yeah,
We're talking about a bunch of peaceful folks. The violence was initiated by the police. So to follow up on that point, though, Chief McMurray says he didn't agree with snipers on the roof. Okay, so what's the consequences? So you didn't have control, right? So you can invite these agencies into the city of Huntsville's limits, but then they're out of your hands at that point.
Well, what he's claiming is the exact same thing that he's claiming against the protesters. What he has said about the protesters are they were outside agitators and they were losing control. And what this report has shown is he brought in outside agitators and he completely lost control of who he was supposed to be. Who he was supposed to be managing.
Well, and we have to hammer this home because Chief McMurray and his folks spread a big lie that there were Antifa, that there were these radicals, outside agitators. I mean, he sounded like Bull Connor. This could have been a speech from the 60s. And supposedly
he put up DSA North Alabama's logo on the thing where he was talking about evil or violent organization. DSA North Alabama, who, by the way, you hear every week on this show. What is their main thing that they're doing right now? They're holding a necessities drive for
to give back to the
homeless
community.
people. Yeah, these are the people that McMurray was warning people about before the protest.
But see, they don't count as part of our community.
Yeah,
according to them, members of DSA.
If you've got the wrong politics, you're not a part of this community, according to McMurray.
Right. If you're a poor black person, if you are an immigrant, or if you're one of these crazy radicals who believes those people are actually human, then you don't count as part of Huntsville's community. You don't deserve representation. And so he gets out here, he spreads these lies, and they were lies, and he knew they were lies. And there's yet to be any accountability for that. Sheriff Turner and City of Madison, they won't even talk about it, period. So, yeah, he lost control. And I also want to just give credit to the many activists and organizers who spoke Thursday night. They were eloquent. They were brilliant. They were bold.
I don't know who this brother from Detroit was because that's the first time I've seen him speak, but I really want to get to know him. So if you're out there listening today, which I doubt you are because you're probably not going to listen to this station, I wouldn't. But if you are and you hear us, get in touch with me. Reach out to me because I want to talk to you some more. I mean, it's important. This guy's came in from Detroit, and he was just right on point.
Speaking from the heart.
Yeah, and we need more people like him in the community.
So I think it can be overemphasized enough that this report was used as a delay tactic by city leadership to say, because, CCJR, TVPA, all these organizations in the community have been pushing for criminal justice reforms since before George Floyd's murder.
Yeah.
Tennessee Valley Progressive Alliance was talking about decriminalization of marijuana and expunging marijuana arrests inside city limits well before this happened.
Yeah, for several years.
Yeah, so, they use this as an excuse to not talk about any reform. Now they have the report, and they're going to have a work session next week. And Angela Curry pointed this out in her citizen comments. So you spent 2 years talking about an amphitheater, on University Drive, but you expect to fix all this in less than a week?
Yeah.
It took you 11 months to talk about 2 nights?
Yeah.
And I'm glad that they did because we have facts now. We have body camera footage showing police targeting innocent people, chasing after people trying to run away, showing where they were trapped. And quite frankly, it looked like an intentional effort.
Pulling them out of cars that had done nothing wrong, that they were doing exactly what they were told, disperse. They try to get in their car to disperse, and they're yanked out of their car.
And let me call out Mayor Battle real quick. Mayor Tommy Battle, who wanted it both ways. He wanted to show up in the afternoon, advertise that he was there in the afternoon, take a knee, so he could show that photo op to the rich Yankee capitalist who want to invest here and show, we're not really like Alabama. Don't put us, don't think about Selma in the 60s. We're different now. So he did that, and then just a couple hours later, he gets to do a whole nother photo op for his friends in the White House, his friends Mo Brooks, Donald Trump, to see, look, we know how to treat these, hippies and radicals out in the streets.
Yeah, unleash the dogs.
So I truly believe in my heart of hearts this was premeditated. This was a planned police riot.
Dude, you don't bring that. I was watching the video. I didn't come over that night, but I was at home watching the live video. There was an endless line of state trooper. I mean, literally hundred. I didn't even know that the state employed that many troopers coming down the road. I mean, it was
those were your tax dollars at work, folks.
Yeah.
Your tax dollars at work. And this report also dispelled the rumors that there were people buying up bricks and acid.
And it goes back to what Jacob was saying, and it needs to be reiterated over and over again that it was a peaceful demonstration, and the only out of all of this craziness that the police want to claim was happening, the only property damage was a window shot out by the police. So if it was, if it was such insanity, where's all the injured police officers? Where are all of the destruction of property at? There is none.
Well, and one thing I will distinctly remember from that night, June 3rd, is I was sick and I was watching it at home and saw a live stream with Channel 19 WHNT. They had a young black female reporter on the ground. They were live streaming on the ground while Jerry Hayes, their longtime, anchor, was on TV telling you not to believe your lying eyes. He was already painting the narrative of radical Antifa, going over Chief McMurray's talking points. I guess hoping that you listen to him and not actually watch the video of his own damn reporter trying to avoid tear gas and pepper spray.
Right.
So, you saw this collusion of various members of the Huntsville, and North Alabama elite to attack innocent people, armed agents of the state. And now if you have a "Don't Tread on Me" flag, if you don't want to be tread on, who the hell do you think's treading on you? These people are dressed like stormtroopers and attacking middle-aged women who brought their kids to demonstrate because they believe that police brutality should come to an end. So that's how you meet a protest over police brutality, is with more police brutality. Well, and you want to paint ourselves as some kind of smart, progressive city.
I think one of the things that the "Don't Tread on Me" folks should take away from this, if there's one important thing that both sides can agree upon, is the lack of accountability in the police department. And I'm not saying that defund the police or anything else. If you don't believe in that, that's fine. But there should, at the bare minimum, there should be some community accountability within the police department. Our taxpayer dollars goes to fund these things. And you should not, no one should be able to do what they want ad nauseum and walk away from it without having to answer questions. I mean, if I'm at my job and I destroy a piece of property, accidentally or not, I'm going to have to go sit in an office and explain my actions. What caused this? Whether, and if it's an accident, that's great. But if it's not, then you need to be held accountable for your actions. And that's one thing that the right preaches consistently is accountability.
Personal responsibility.
But yet we're not allowing.
That's one of the problems that people ostensibly have with unions is that, you don't have enough accountability. And, there is not a single union workplace where if there's an allegation of misconduct or you're not doing your job, where the workers can just say, I'm not gonna comply with your investigation. I'm not gonna say anything at all. There's got to be some amount of cooperation and accountability there, and there is in every other profession except law enforcement.
Yeah. So I want to be fair here that the report also demonstrated that there were police officers on the ground who realized what was happening was crazy. They were caught on camera saying these guys were peaceful. They were caught on camera, Huntsville Police Department, wondering what the hell the Madison County Sheriff's was up to. Why were they escalating the situation? Many of the police officers clearly demonstrated that they were confused. They didn't know what their expectations were for this kind of event. But here's another one I want to make sure people see from this report. One video shows an officer asking another group of IRT officers. Now, IRT is basically like their riot control. So he goes up to the group of riot control officers and asks, are you guys the arrest team? One of the Huntsville officers in this riot team responded, quote, no, we F people up. Now, that's your tax dollars there. Yeah. A squadron of people there to F people up, people who were peaceful. Yeah. People who were simply demanding that the accountability, not even justice, but accountability.
Yeah.
It's infuriating. It is an embarrassment to the city and to the region.
And it's important to point out that one of the takeaways was the own police officers on the body camera said we're not trained. We're not trained for this, So you've got these IRT people, these stormtroopers dressed up in all of this bulletproof gear with 5.56s, ARs, and you're not trained. I mean, it's apparent you weren't trained because you got your sights set into the crowd to execute people, but also the people on the ground, not trained. So where's the accountability? And we're saying this because Huntsville, you've got to hold these people accountable. Everything went fine this time other than some ripped apart calves and busted up windows. But what happens the next time?
Well, and let me say this. We had a councilwoman, and I don't think she meant it quite the way it came out, but she actually remarked in her comments Thursday night that she was glad it didn't escalate more and it wasn't worse and that nobody was killed. Now, how absurd is that that we have to be grateful
Yeah.
that no one
That the
gets
police didn't
killed
kill
at a
anybody.
peaceful protest. Are we at that point in a supposedly free country with a supposedly small government? We have to be grateful we're not murdered.
Yeah. Yeah, by the same people that are supposed to be protecting us.
Yeah. Yeah,
From
I mean,
who?
it's
Protecting us from who?
Adam, didn't you say that in the report there was a quote from a cop that was basically admitting that there's no reason for us to be here?
Yes, yes. I mean, the report documented lots of police officers who weren't sure why they were there, and also could tell that other officers were escalating the situation. And one of the saddest ones was where an officer was actually being mocked and joked on by fellow officers because he wasn't being violent enough.
Jeez.
This person clearly realized, this protester was not a threat. There's no need for me to pepper spray them in the face, and he's getting made fun of by the other cops around him.
Hopefully he realized that he's in the wrong profession.
Yeah.
I hope so too. I mean, sadly, those are the people we should want, right? Someone who actually has a heart and empathy. What if I was on the other side of this pepper spray?
Yeah.
What if it was my child being shot with a rubber bullet?
Yeah.
But that goes back to the point we made earlier, and it comes through loud and clear in this report, that among a large section of the officers there, and certainly among the leadership, the people giving them orders, they did not view those protesters as part of the community.
Right.
They did not view them as their neighbors and their fellow human beings. Yeah. And that's what's disgusting about it. And this city runs on federal funds.
Yeah.
This city runs on, and I know I'm going to make some enemies with this, but let's face it, the military-industrial complex is the economy of this region.
Yeah.
And so I think there is some ties to that. I still want to know, where did the Antifa rumors come from?
Yeah.
Who all was feeding those rumors? Because that made the situation so much worse. I mean, you had businesses on Airport Road, miles away from downtown, thinking they had to board up their windows.
Yeah.
Well,
just
that's
completely
because the police-
asinine.
I mean, because the report showed that the police were telling them that.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't know what to say.
So what was we've got like about a minute left. What are the next steps that this report laid out and that came out at, like, what happens next?
What happens next is that I believe the 28th of next week, there's going to be a city council work session where they're going to actually talk about what next steps, what are the reforms to come out of this. But I think we got to join up with our brothers and sisters, NCCJR, TVPA, other groups pushing for change. Not just about the way they handle protests, but the way they operate criminal justice in this city.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the council people, I can't remember his name, the black gentleman that was on the far right, he mentioned that he deals with this in his community every day, that this wasn't a 2-day isolated event. Right. And I think that's important to point out, that this didn't happen and end on that one day. His community members see this type of oppression every day.
Right. Well, we've seen it more than just those 2 days. Yeah. I spoke at a Remove the Monument rally, and there were snipers up on the roof of the courthouse there for a rally that had like 50 people there. And at our Labor for Black Lives rally, where all the unions in the area came together, there were cops on their scanners talking about how they wish they could shoot us. And then one of them came in and like corrected them and was like, "Yeah, we've got munitions. We don't want to kill them." Basically, is what he was saying. But I mean, yeah, it's not just this one-day incident. So, folks, this is it for this week. We will see you next week.
WVNN Athens, WVNN FM Trinity, a Cumulus station. It's 11 o'clock. News starts now.